All right, what's going on? Today we're back and we are going to be talking about how we're going to build a MERN stack application with full JSON Web Token authentication. So we'll do a quick review before we go in. So this will be what the purpose of this first introductory video is. But that's what we want to do. Essentially, I want to go back over the architecture of a MERN stack application. As you can see, I have this diagram here on the left side. And you can see we got this picture of this gorgeous panther here with this with the gold chain. And you can see that individual is going to actually visit the application. And when they visit the application, what they're actually looking at in the application is they're looking at the front end without looking at the back end of the app. And that front end application is a completely separate application technically from what's going on in the back end of the application. So if you take a look, you will essentially see some things like, for example, we have let's see, we've got our components, we got our services, and you'll see inside the components, we also have our routing components, and inside of our services, we also have this box that says Fetch API in there, which we'll get to in a second. But we can see that's our full front end client application. And then there's this little arrow here that's in the center. And that little arrow in the center, essentially, this two-way arrow is symbolizing the fact that what your front end application is going to do is going to talk to your back end using asynchronous JavaScript or AJAX and HTTP requests. So, for example, you want to go ahead and get a list of all of your, let's say if your application was a e-commerce application and you wanted to get a list of every single thing that's inside the store for you to sell, you'd make an API call to the backend. The backend would respond back to the front end with a list of all of those particular items that are for sale, and then your front end would take those items for sale and display them to the client. So the client never directly makes any requests or works with the backend. Everything that's needed from the backend is directly asked of the front end when the front end makes those API requests. And that might seem a little bit strange, but there's a lot of benefits to doing it that way. And one of those benefits is after you first load up your application. So once somebody makes a request and says, "Let me go to this website," once they get onto the website, the in a traditional website, every single time a user goes to a new web page, you have to reload and re-grab the entire page, etc., get it from the back end, right? Which sometimes, depending on page speed, etc., can take a long time. But with doing it this way, what we do is we actually load up all of the code needed for every single one of the pages within this application on the front end. And then every single time we need additional data, we just make a quick request to the back end, but we make a much smaller request because we're only asking for data. We're not asking for new for repaints of the DOM. We're not asking for there to be, for us to send like these big, large HTML files, etc. All we're doing is we just say, give me a little bit more data, give me a little bit more data, give me a little bit more data every time you need data, right? And that's only for data that actually happens to be dynamic and is actually changing. For data that actually doesn't that is actually static and doesn't need to be changed, we don't even need to make any API requests to get that at all. We've already loaded all of the code that we need to be able to build every single page directly into the browser. So the browser will take care of showing you every individual page. You never have to make another request to the server to get an entire page. So we end up with with an application that runs a whole lot faster after we get that initial load. And there's also benefits that we can do if we get more advanced, where we can actually where we can do even some more optimizations by using isomorphic applications and things like that, with stuff like Next.js, or even things like Gatsby, which actually do a site generation, based on certain data. So that is that, and that's our general architecture. We're going to come back to that. We're going to keep using that as we continue to go through the series, and we keep building more and more applications using the MERN stack. What I did want to kind of drop down to is where it says breakdown of JWTs, because we are going to be using JSON Web Tokens in order for us to do our authentication. And essentially, these JSON Web Tokens, they're broken down into three parts, and we'll see that together in our code. But you have a header, you have a payload, you have a signature. And the part that we're really concerned about, for our purposes, if you want to know more about JWTs, you can look at some more documentation or some videos that I might make that'll go deeper into hours about just JWTs and hashing algorithms and all that type of stuff. But I'm going to focus in on the part that's really going to be important to us, which is the part in the middle, which is the payload, right? And the payload of your JSON Web Token is what's going to contain all of the data that you want to pull out of the JSON Web Token. And the signature is going to essentially have is going to be the signature that allows for the server to guarantee that you have given them a valid JWT that was created by that server. So the way it works essentially is, let's say I go onto a website. So I go onto a website and I sign up for that website. So I put in my name, my email, etc., whatever is needed for me to sign up for that website. I create a password, and what's going to happen is that is going to get sent to the server, right? Now, when the server goes and creates my user data, that gets stored inside of a database, right? So I've now signed up. Now, when I go to log in with those same credentials, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go back to the website, I'm going to log in with those credentials I used last time to sign up. And once I do that, what's going to happen is that information that I put in, the name and the password, gets sent to the server, and then the server is going to verify those credentials are correct. If those credentials are correct, the server is going to respond with this JSON Web Token. And essentially, the way the JSON Web Token is going to work, it's going to work like when you go to a club, right? You go to a club, you want to go party, and you need to go in and out of the club, but you don't want to have to keep proving or paying to say that you belong inside the club. So what they give you is they give you a little wristband, or they stamp something on your hand. And that little wristband or that stamp is what lets the bouncer at the door know that you're good to go. You've already been verified, and you can come back inside the club over and over and over again. Now, your JSON Web Token works the same way. I've already verified your username and password. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you this token. And this token is what your browser is going to keep using to keep you logged into that application. So every single time you go in, every single time, what's happening is that your front end application, right, that we saw here at the top, right, is going to keep, whenever it makes an AJAX request to the back end, it's going to send that JSON Web Token to the back end, right, so that the server can verify, yep, I see the token, I've already verified you, you are good to go, you can keep going, right? So that's the way we use the JWT. We use it to keep ourselves logged in so that we don't have to do the process of logging the user in over and over and over again, right? And it makes a better user experience for the user because nobody wants to type their password over and over and over again. I've noticed some of you right now that have been logged into Facebook for 10 years and never been logged out. And this token architecture is the reason why. You are able to stay logged in because what happens is, like I said, you go ahead and enter your credentials into a form. It gets sent to the server. The server verifies that you're logged in, and then sends your client back a token. That client application and saves the token, right, in cookies or local storage, etc. It saves the token. then every single time you come back to the application over and over and over and over again, right? They're going to verify the token every single time, and that token is going to let them know that you are a valid authenticated user, right? So the way this works, um, when we're using it, is the user submits a form, right? They click a button, user effect runs. That event handler for the function runs inside the React component. Then a user service function runs, a user API function runs, and you make an HTTP request, right? Using the fetch API. The server receives the request. The server is going to respond to the request. Then the React app is going to receive the response and store the response in the state. And then the React app is going to re-render due to the state change, right? Every single time that fetch over HTTP happens, you're going to send the token with it. This way that the server knows, right, that it should respond favorably to the request and give you the stuff that you require. Like for example, if I have a token stored inside my user and I go to, let's say, Instagram, when I go to the Instagram website, Instagram is going to see that token and know that I'm a logged in user, so I can log in. And then when I want to go ahead and, let's say, for example, look at my profile data, right, was inside the payload of that JSON web token, right? So they know what to paint the screen with all the data that was inside that payload. Another thing is that my token only authorizes me to do stuff to my account. So if I try to do something to your account, it would not work because my token did not give me authorization to do that, right? And the way that we continuously verify the token is legitimate is because the signature needs to match the rest of the rest of the JWT. If it does not, and if anything has been tampered with, the signature will be invalid. And if the signature is invalid, right, then that token is invalid. And one of the great things about the SHA-256 algorithm that JWTs tend to use is that it's a one-way algorithm. So there's no way you can read a SHA-256 hash and figure out what the data was that made the hash because they're all the same length. So even if you hash the whole entire book of Moby Dick or you hash the word Arthur, either one of those two is going to have the exact same length of characters, and there's no pattern to the way the characters look. Changing adding one space, one character, one anything will change the entire hash. So if you tamper with the payload, automatically the payload and the signature will be out of whack with each other, and will immediately know that JWT has been tampered with and it's not secure, right? So that's what's happening there. So that's our quick introduction. So with that introduction, we're going to go ahead and jump into actually building the application. So let's go ahead and get going with that. And so we're going to start with always building the server. So that's what we're going to jump into. So let's go ahead and let me zoom in a little bit. And let's cd into, I'm going to go to my software classwork folder. And in here, I'm going to just go ahead and do an npx create React app. So I can create a React application, and I'm going to name this, let's call it MERN, and let's call it MERN E-Comm. So I'm going to call the folder MERN E-Comm. And we'll go ahead and wait for that to finish real quick. Cool, so we went ahead and did that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and CD into the MERN E-Comm folder. Clear really quick. And then I'm going to open that up in VS Code. And then here in VS Code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set up my folder structure. So in order for us to build this full stack application, we're going to first need a server.js file. And so I'm going to go ahead and make a file called server.js that's going to hold all of my server code. And then I'm going to go ahead and begin to create all of my backend stuff as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a folder. I'm going to call that folder backend, like so. Make sure I spell that right. Right. So I'm going to go ahead and make that backend folder. And inside that backend folder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my, add my backend stuff in here. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder in here. I'm going to call this config. This is going to be my backend config stuff. Then I'm going to go ahead and make another new folder. I'm going to call this one controllers. This is going to hold all my controllers. Right? I'm going to go ahead and make another one. I'm going to make another new folder. I'm going to call it models. I'm going to make another one. I'll make another new folder. And I am going to call it routes. So all of my backend code is going to be in here. You see I have my configuration, my controllers, my models, and my routes. Then my SRC folder has way too much junk inside of it. The SRC folder is where your front end code is going to go. And inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete everything except for the index.js. I'm going to delete all of that. Delete, move all that to the trash. I'm going to delete this stuff here as well. Then my index.js file. I'm going to go ahead and remove this report web vital stuff. And I'll remove that from here as well. Right? Get that kind of empty. And then I'm going to, inside the SRC folder, add my front end code. So I'm going to add, for example, I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call this components. I'm going to make another one, another file. Another folder, and I'm going to call this folder pages. Right? And then I'm going to make another folder, and I'm going to call it utilities. Right? So I'm going to make components, pages, and utilities inside SRC, which is for my front end. Right? Public, we're going to leave that alone. We don't want to touch that. But we have backend, and we have SRC for the front end, so we know our front end code is in here. Then I'm going to take that server.js file that I made initially. I'm just going to drop it here inside of the backend folder. Just like that. Move it there. And so backend is going to have config, controllers, models, routes, and server.js. And then my front end is going to have components, pages, utilities, index.js. Also inside the root of the source folder, I'm going to make a new file. Right? And I'm just going to call it styles. .css. Right? We'll actually make it an SCSS file. Right? And in index.js, instead of importing index.css, I'm going to delete that line. And instead, I'm going to do that at the very, very top of the file. And I'm just going to say import, and I'm going to import /styles.scss. Right, just like that at the top. Then inside my pages folder, right? So you see I put this inside the SRC folder because this is all front end code, right? And then inside the pages folder within there, I'm going to make a new file. It's going to be the first one that I make. And I'm going to make an app.js file in here. And inside here, I'm not going to do anything except for quickly just say that I am going to export default. Right, so I'll do a quick export default. I'll do a function. I'll name it app. I will say that it has a props argument. And I will say that it returns. Right, and what I'm going to return in here is let's return a div. And inside the div, I'm going to put an h1. And that h1 is just going to say, hello, I am your app. Just like that. Then I'm going to save that. Then I'm going to go back to index.js. And in index.js, what I am going to actually do in index.js, instead of saying that I want to import app from /app, my app is in the pages folder. So I'm going to go to /pages/app like so. And save it. So that will be my general structure here, right? So I have my backend folder with my config, my controllers, my models, my routes, right? And then I have my front end with components, pages, utilities, index, and styles, right? And then all of the other stuff that's not either front end or back end stuff, like the README, the package, JSON, get ignore, things like that I'll just leave in the root. So that is what I'll do. I will also go to my get ignore, and so I don't forget to do this, I will make sure that I ignore my .env file, right, that I'm going to eventually create. And I will save that, so this way that is done as well. So I won't have any issues with my .env file. So those are the basic first steps that I'm going to take. And of course, we're going to get started with the back end first, right? Because that is the right way for us to do things. Always start with the back. And the first thing I'm going to do is whenever you're building your applications, you always want to start with the model. The model is the most important thing when you're building a MERN stack application, because that's really going to be how we decide what we're going to do with everything else. So essentially what I'm going to do is I need to map out the models that I need in order to build my application. And the application I'm trying to build is I'm going to build a simple e-commerce application where I can sell things. So I'm going to need things like, for example, I'm going to need users, right? Customers, right? So I'm going to have to make a user model. I'm going to also need to have items that I can purchase. So I will need items, right? And I'll just say items. I'm also going to need to have orders. So customers are going to need to be able to make orders, right? So you have orders. And then we're going to need to have a special kind of order. We probably won't need a model for this. We'll see. But we're going to need a cart to basically hold an order until we're ready to finish it and make a purchase. So we're going to also need a cart. Now I'll put a little asterisk by that. And for the items, we're probably going to want to categorize them. So we are definitely going to need to have categories. That's going to be a model we need. Right? And we could get a lot more complicated subcategories and tags and all type of stuff. Whoops, can't write that correctly. Category. Right? So we're going to need to have users, items, orders. We're going to need to have a cart. That cart needs to belong to a user. As a matter of fact, orders need to belong to users too, right? And items need to belong to orders. And categories, an item can have a category, and then categories can have items. You could say that that's kind of pointed in both directions, kind of. So that is the basic setup that we're going to need. We're going to need to have users. They're going to need to be able to look up items, add those items to the cart, right? And then when they're done with the cart, they're going to need to be able to purchase the items in the cart. And purchasing the items in the cart is going to create a completed order, right? And those orders are going to belong to the users, and the cart is going to belong to a user. So that is our general setup. And we're going to be using MongoDB, of course, in order to model this. So this is going to require us to have a nice, little amount of interconnected models, more so than we've been able to do previously with, let's say, for example, our to-do. If you haven't looked at the to-do series, you should take a look at that, or that we've done with the bookmarks as well. This is going to actually let us really build a large amount of interconnectedness with our application. So what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and clear all this. And what I want to do is I want to model all that stuff in our backend. So to get started with that, I'm going to actually start with the, let's start with the item schema. So we're going to do the items first, then we're going to do the orders, right? Then we're going to do the users, right? That's what we're going to do in that order. And then, yeah, we'll take care of the categories also. So we'll do it that way. In order for us to get started with that, I'm going to need all of my backend modules that I'm going to need. So I'm going to go ahead and npm I express because I'm going to need that for my controllers. I'm going to need Mongoose for my models. I'm going to need Morgan for my logging, which is going to come in very, very handy. So Express, Mongoose, Morgan. We're going to need .env as well for our environment variables. And that's kind of our basic ones. We're also going to need bcrypt, right? We're going to need bcrypt. And the reason why we need bcrypt is because bcrypt is going to allow us to be able to hash our passwords, which is important because we don't want to save passwords right there in plain text because that makes them susceptible. Like if somebody was to hack into your database, and they see it, they see passwords in plain text, they see emails along with it, and they have a really really good Caesar cipher to basically try to figure out how they could break into people's other accounts. And so you're really doing a disservice to your users. So you really don't want to do that. So we're gonna make sure that we use bcrypt for that. We're also going to make sure we use JSON Web Token so we can make our web tokens like we talked about, our JWTs, right? So we'll go ahead and add JSON Web Token also. And then we're also going to use something that we don't technically need, but I just like to have this package called serve favicon. Just make it so that we can skip a couple steps when it comes to serving our favicon. It just makes things easier for us when it comes to that. So those are the things we're going to add. This is going to give us all of our backend functionality that we need. So I will add that, and that will get added to our package.json. This should be pretty quick. None of these packages are very large. Bcrypt, maybe a little bit. But that's about it, right? So boom, that's done. We'll go ahead and do a quick clear. And then we will jump in. So like I said, we're going to start with the models. The first one we're going to do is we're going to do the item, right? Item is going to be the most important one to us. So let's go ahead and jump right to the item, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make a new file in here called item.js, right? And for item.js, we're going to go ahead and say that const, and we really just need the schema. So we're going to say const schema like so. And let's also grab model, right? And we're going to go ahead and say that that's equal to us requiring mongoose, right? So we get schema and model from mongoose, and then we'll just say that const item schema, and that's going to be equal to a brand new schema. And we'll think about the things that we need in order to make a schema, in order to make an item. And so what I'm kind of thinking is that we have, of course, we have a name for the item, right? So the item has to have a name. We'll think that that name should be required and it should be a string. So I'll say type string, right? And then I will say that it's required to have that name. So I'll say required is true, right? I also think that we need to have some type of image. I'm going to use emojis for mine. So I'm going to say emoji, and I'm just going to say that's a string. I'm not going to make it required, right? And that's just because I'm going to use emojis for the images because I think that's going to be cool. But I can name that IMG or whatever if I wanted to use another type of image or just wanted to be more generic. The category, what we're going to do here is I'm going to say that the type is going to be schema, right? Dot types, dot object ID, right? And the ref is going to be the category that we're eventually going to make that we haven't made yet. So we're just preemptively making that, but it's not going to work until we make a category, right? So we're going to have to make a category for that to work correctly. Now I'm going to go ahead and say price. And the reason why this is fine because for me to do it this way is I'm not going to run my code yet because my code does not work yet, right? So until I get to the point where I want to start testing my code, I'm not going to run the application. I'm going to write the bare bones, and then I'm going to turn the application on. So I'll go ahead and say price. I will say that the type of price is going to be a number because every item needs to have a price that you buy it by. And then I'm going to say that that is required as well. That we need to know the price of the item. And I'm also going to just turn on my timestamps. I'm going to say timestamps are going to be true. Right? And there we go. So overall, we have our schema. Then I'm going to go ahead and say mongoose. Well, let's actually just say modules.export. And we are going to, whoops, I just wrote that backwards. Module.exports. See, happens to the best of us. Good thing I saw it though. And then we'll go ahead and we'll export the model function. And we're going to go ahead and say that I'm going to call the model item, and I'm going to say it uses the item schema that we just saw. And that's what we'll do. So we've got our module.exports model item schema. We'll go ahead and save that. And now that we have the item, we'll go ahead and make the categories now. So we'll go ahead, we'll do a little category, and I'll go ahead and make a new file. I'll call it category.js. And in category.js, it's going to be very similar to the other one. We're going to say const, and actually, since we're going to copy so much of it, I'm going to go to item, and I'm just going to copy all that because it's going to be so much repeat. We're still going to need schema, model, require, mongoose, always going to happen. The schema name is not going to be the item schema. You probably guessed it. It's going to be category schema. Right? Now the categories are going to have a name. That's going to be true, right? But the other thing is that I'm not going to have emojis or prices or anything like that or another category. Instead, the only thing I care about is the sort order of the category, right? The sort order of the category. And the reason why that's going to be important to me is we'll see when we actually build our front end. I care about the order I want the categories to show up in on the page. Like I always want, let's say if I was on a news website, maybe I always want news to come before politics, right? So I want to guarantee the order of my documents. So I'm going to add this sort order so that I can arrange everything to be, sorted by that particular number. And then I'm going to save that. right? Then instead of calling it model, of course, I'm going to call it category. So instead of calling it item, I'm going to call it category. And then the schema I'm using, of course, is the category schema. And again, you may or may not know this, but you see that I called the model category here. I need to make sure that that is going to be the same as the ref that I use. So make sure that those two match up. It's okay to spell things wrong, but spell it wrong everywhere. If you're really going to spell it wrong, if you want to spell it differently. So just verify that. And then we'll continue. So now that I have the item, I have the category, and I can go ahead and I can move on to we can move on to the order, right? And so what I'm going to do with the particular order is the order is going to be very advanced. It's going to be probably one of the most advanced models that well, we definitely want most advanced one we looked at so far, and one of the more advanced ones that we're going to look at inside of this particular series. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const. I'm going to go ahead and actually just paste this because I'm still going to need the same basics, right? And but this stuff down here is going to be a little bit different. So I'm actually going to delete that, and I'm going to delete what's in here. And I'm going to need two separate schemas. So I'm right here. I'm going to go ahead and make a line item schema, right? And you'll see why in a little bit. Then I'm also going to make an order schema. And I'm not going to need to re-import this. But I'm going to make an order schema. And I'm actually going to need two schemas in order to make my model this time. I'm going to take that out for right now too. You'll eventually see what we're going to do there. So I'm going to need a line item schema and an order schema. And essentially what the line items in this schema are when I go to the application, I'm going and I actually am adding items to my cart. Every item that I add to the cart, let's say for example, I want to add some eggs to my cart. I want to add some fruit to my cart. I want to add some whatever to my cart. The line items essentially are going to be, right? How can I say? The line items are actually going to be the those individual things inside the cart. But the way I kind of want to map it out so you better get what I mean is if I go ahead and put this like box here. Let's say this represents an order. And let's say in this order I have eggs. Let's say eggs and I have juice. So I got eggs and I got juice. Right? So let's say that's what I'm buying. Now, not only do I need to know that I'm buying eggs and juice, I need to know that I'm buying that item. I need to know how many eggs I'm buying. So maybe I'm buying 3 eggs. Maybe I'm buying 4 juices. So what the line item is going to be is going to be a combination of a reference to the item and how many of that item I'm buying. Right? So how much of that item am I buying? Am I buying 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Like how much of that item do I want to purchase? So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out, right? And let's go ahead and actually put that into practice in our code. So let's go ahead and say that I want to have a property called quantity. And what quantity is going to be, it's going to be a type of a number. And it's going to have a default value of 1, right? Because if I add it to my cart, then I obviously want at least one of it. Then below here, all I really need to know is what item, right, this line item refers to. And there's 2 ways I can do it. I could do what I did in the item, where I have a ref to the category, right? Um, and that's fine if I was to do it that way, and that will work. But I'm actually going to do something different, and I want you to follow me when I do it, because what I'm actually going to do instead is I'm not going to use the whole entire item model. I'm just going to use the item schema to make sure that the content matches a certain look. And the reason for that is I really don't need to have any connection to the item, right? When I create the order, except to know how many of the item I'm buying, right? I don't really need to know. I really don't need to connect directly to the model because the model has no real data I need except for the information about what it is. Now, if I wanted to start storing things like inventory and things of that nature, maybe I might want to have a full ref. Or it's also very simple for me to keep a running total on the item itself, right, of how much the inventory that it has. But I only need to know the inventory when it comes to creating a purchase. And then once I purchase, then to actually lower the inventory, by that amount, different things like that. So there's a lot of up and down things that you could have when we're dealing with the inventory. So that's a for another time, because also we don't want people to put more things in their cart than is available in the inventory. You're gonna have to track those things, et cetera, et cetera. And that might be something we come back to in a later lesson. But for this one, we're gonna keep it simple, and we're gonna say that these are digital items, so there is no inventory, right? I'm selling a digital item. Once I sell it, it is what it is. They're gone, or it's not a digital item, but it's more so an item that I make on demand. So I always have raw material, and I'm always able to make it. And if I ever run out of things, then I have to just shut it off. I know we've all probably been in the the thing at the mom and pop shop where they run out of something and then they can't make it anymore. They don't know exactly how many they can make. They just know that I'm going to keep making them until the stuff runs out, and then when I run out of one of the ingredients, there we go. I can't make them anymore, and that's kind of more of a manual process, right? As opposed to you having like a set of books and there's inventory. There's only 500 books. It's only 500 books can get added to carts. But like I said, all those things are things that we're going to take that complexity out for right now. But if we ever want to advance, or if a lot of people like this video and they want to take it to that next level, we can add some extra some checks and balances for inventory. So back to what I am going to do, because I just did a whole thing about what I'm not going to do. Let's go back to what I am going to do real quick before we stop this video and go to the next one. So what I am going to do now is I'm going to come over to item, and I'm just going to simply do this, because I can make a separate file if I want to, but I don't really have to. I'm just going to go ahead and do a little creative curly braces here. And I want the model, and I'm going to make that equal to running the model function, and I'm going to say that I want item to be the name of the model, and then I want item schema to be the schema for the model. And then the schema by itself, I'm going to go ahead and export that. As a matter of fact, I'll export it with the name of item schema, and I'll call this item model. Just like that, so I'll export both items separately. And then I'll save it. And so then when I come here to orders, I'll be able to import that. So I'm going to go ahead and say const, boom, item schema. And I'm going to say that's equal to require. And I'm going to require dot slash item. And you see I'm going to get the item schema from the item file. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply say that the item is just going to match the item schema. So all that's going to happen is the item schema is going to be nested directly into the line item schema. Right? That's what I will do. And like I said, I want to do that because I don't need to really do more with it except that. All I really need to do is make sure that the items match what the item schema would look like. because I'm going to push the data of each item directly into the item schema. And I don't want it to be a nested, I don't want it to be a ref to the document. I just want it to be embedded directly here inside the line item schema, because I'm going to use the line item schema in the orders. And that's the reason why I want to do it that way. I'm also going to go ahead, and not only am I going to say timestamps are true, I'm also going to do ToJSON, right? And I'm going to, for that, I'm going to say that the virtuals are going to be true, means when I turn this into JSON data, it's going to turn the virtuals into JSON also, which is going to be important for me because I'm going to create a virtual property. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a thing that's called line item schema.virtual. And I want to know the price, right, of the line items. And so essentially what I mean is, let's say if the eggs are $5.99, because eggs are expensive now, and if I got 6 of them, well, that's $35.94, right? So I want the virtual to automatically do the math to tell me how much I'm using, to tell me how much money each line item cost. So I'm going to go ahead and call that the EXT price, the extended price. And I'm going to say that it's going to be a .get. And basically it just means basically in this instance, what that means is I'm just going to make it so that I have this virtual property that we have a getter function to get that virtual property. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to return this, right, dot quantity, right, times this dot item dot price, right? And so however many items whatever the quantity of items I have times the item price is going to be the EXT price that this line item is going to have, right? And essentially this, in this case, refers to the individual line item, right? So that's what we'll do there. And then for the order schema, it's going to be a lot of the same, right? Because we're going to leverage that line items array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a user. We haven't made the user model yet, but we will soon. And we'll say that's actually going to be a reference, because we do want that to be a ref. And we'll go ahead and say that's going to be schema, right, dot types, dot object ID, right? And I'm going to go ahead and say the ref for that is going to be a user that we have not made yet. And I'm keeping things really simple here, because there's more things I can do, but I'm just going to keep it simple so we don't add too much complexity until we get to maybe project number 10 or something like that. So we're on project number 3, so we're still going to slow burn it up until we keep going, each one getting more and more complex. So we'll go ahead and we'll say the line items, though, that if I could just hit the M key, the line items that we're going to have, they are going to be an array of objects that all match the line item schema, right? And that's how I will write that, right? And then I'm going to also have a thing that says is paid. That's how we'll deal with the cart logic. And we'll simply just say that by default, an order is going to be not paid. And that order that's not paid, well, that's the cart. So we'll just keep updating the order. And then once we pay for it, then we won't update it anymore. And so we'll default order to being to not being paid, because that is your cart, right? And then once you complete it, once you pay for it, then it is paid, right? And then we'll also do ToJSON on here and say that essentially when we turn this to JSON, we want to show our virtual properties. Right? And then we'll go ahead and add a couple of virtual properties. We don't have to add too many, but just a couple just for us to be able to better deal with this order stuff. And so essentially what we're going to do is we're going to add a bunch of these extra methods just like we did here, right? So we're going to add a couple of virtual properties, a couple of static properties, or maybe just one static property, and then a couple of just methods that we want to be able to call in order to manipulate the collection in the MongoDB database. So the way that we will start is I will make our virtual properties, which are virtual properties. Those are going to be like just values that we can get, but that get automatically calculated for us. Like for example, we'll be able to get this ext price. It's going to but every single time the quantity changes, right? It's automatically going to update this value for us, right? So this is going to be something that gets calculated for us on the fly, and we're going to make a couple of values that do that for us too here. So I'll start off with, we'll go ahead and we'll take the order schema, right? And we will add a virtual property. And this virtual property is going to be called order total. So we'll say order total. And order total, right, is simply going to be a function. And I'm using the function keyword on purpose because I'm using this keyword. So it actually needs to be that type of function. So don't change that even if you hate regular functions. Don't do an arrow function there. And what we're going to say, we're going to return this, right? And let's say line items dot reduce, right? And because what we're saying, we want to know the full value of the order, like how much does the whole order cost. So one of the great things we could do, we could use the reduce method, since we have an array of the line items, and we're just going to add up, right, all of the, we're just going to add up every single one of the prices of the items. So we'll just call the accumulator, we'll call it total, because that's going to be the total price. Or I'm just going to call it total price, right? Or let's just call it order total, since that's what we already were calling it there. So we'll call it order total. And then here we will essentially say that I also am going to have an item that I'm going to be manipulating each time. That's going to stand for each individual line item. Actually, I'll go ahead and call it line item, because this is going to be each individual line item in the array as I iterate through the array. So essentially what we want to do within here is we want to return the total plus, right, the line item that we happen to currently be looking at, right, and its ext price. So we're just going to add those up as a running total. And we're going to keep adding them. Like the first time we have 0, then we'll add whatever the first line item ext price. And then the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, et cetera, until we get to the end. And we just want to keep that total always on the order. So that's what we're doing there. So now we'll always know what our order total is. We don't have to calculate it on the front end. The back end will calculate it for us, and it will be available to us in the JSON that we send back to the user when we make our response. Just like we did in bookmarks and to-dos, same thing here. Then what we're going to do next is we're going to make another property. And so we'll say order schema dot virtuals. So we'll add a virtual property, and we'll call this one total quantity. And we'll essentially say total, let's say total quantity dot get, and we're going to give it a function. And for that function, all we're going to do is we're going to do another reduce. This dot line items dot reduce. And we're doing the same thing here. Essentially, what we're going to do, we're going to have a little method like we had before. We're going to start it at 0. And we just want to know the total quantity of items inside of our cart. So I'm going to have just call this total quantity. And I see I have a typo here. Order total. And then I'm going to have each one of the line items here. And essentially what I'm going to do in here is I am going to say that I want to, let's say, let's just say we're going to we're going to go ahead and return the total quantity. Um, let's say plus the line item dot quantity. Right? So we're going to be adding that up every single time, and that essentially is going to end up giving us the total amount of items that are inside of our cart. Because we're adding up all the line items. Like if I have 5 eggs, three cucumbers, 4 pickles, 7 mushrooms, whatever the heck I have, I'm just going to add up that full quantity list. Right? And then I'm also going to do this thing where I make an order ID, because why not? And essentially all I'm going to do is I need a unique identifier for each order. So I'm pretty sure you've seen order IDs before, and I'm going to make one for us as well. And all I want to do with that order ID is I just want to take the Mongo ID and just make it shorter. Right? And I could do that a number of ways. I could take the first 5 numbers, the last 5 numbers, last 6 numbers, etc. Doesn't really matter which one I do. I don't know why this says add and not virtuals. Right? And and like I said, I could do a number of different things. I'm just going to go ahead and return. Let's say this dot let's say underscore ID, or this dot ID actually, and let's say this dot ID, let's say dot slice, and let's just take like 5 characters. So we have a 5-digit. We'll have a 5-digit order ID, and then we'll uppercase it, and because there's going to be letters in there that are lowercase and stuff like that, and we'll just do that. We'll uppercase it, and there we go. We got a little order ID. Right. So this dot ID dot slice -5 to uppercase. Right. Cool. And so that will work for us. And then let's review what each one of these does. So again, we have our line items, right? Let's just write this out before we pause here for the next video. And essentially, we have our orders, right? And an order is going to have a bunch of different line items, right? So for example, we might have eggs, and we might get 3 eggs, and eggs might be $5.99 each, so that might be $17.97, right? That $17.97 is going to be the EXT price, which is just the quantity times the price of the eggs, right? Then we also have the orders, and we're going to have an order total. So we have an order total that's going to be the price of all the items. Let's say if all we have is eggs, the order total will be $17.97. That's how much the person needs to pay. And a total quantity of, let's say, for example, 3 items. right? So that's what we're doing so far. And also the order is going to have an ID, and let's say an order ID of, let's say, 5B432, right? And that's the order ID. And so that's what we've done so far, so we can have that order ID. The order is also going to be by default not paid, right? So while order is not paid, we are going to make that our cart. So every time you add items to your cart, you're adding items to your unpaid order. And we're also going to add some checks to make sure that a user can only have one unpaid order at a time. So they can only have one cart. So that is something that's a complexity that we will tackle here, because it is required, because we don't want users coming back and then getting a different cart every single time. You want them to come back to the same cart every single time, right? So that is what we have done so far, um, and um, and I'm happy with the way this looks so far. So what we're gonna do soon is we are going to go ahead and get into the next step, which is we're going to make our user and then build our controller. We're also going to add a couple more methods to the order schema, but they're only going to make sense once we actually make the user. So we're going to make the user, then come back to the order schema and then finish it with the additional pieces that we want to add. And then we'll see that logic of how we want the users and the orders to work together. And then we'll make some controllers, routes, and a server in order to make those things work together. And then we'll test to make sure that it works inside of Postman. So we'll do that in our next video. So I will see you all next time. Take care.